Hello, and thank you for joining us for this virtual conversation that we're going to have here today about a book called Cowboys and Conductors. I actually happen to have it here, and we're going to be joined today by one of the authors. Let me tell you who I am. I'm Stephanie Elam, and I'm going to moderate this discussion today with one of the co-authors of this book, who happens to be a Johns Hopkins University alumnus, Paul Jan Zdunek. Paul, thank you so much for being here with us today to talk a bit about the book that you co-authored here with Dustin Davis. Thanks for being here.
So great to be here with you, Stephanie. Thanks.
So I've read your book. I've read the whole book, and there were some very insightful pieces in here that I almost think people know, but they're afraid to actually deal with outside of their own brain, right? There's plenty of things that people need to understand to see how it can impact their relationship to the people they work with, how they lead in these groups. But what's interesting here is I don't think people realize that there could be any sort of connection between how someone might take care of horses and how someone might use their human qualities in the office. So please explain how you even came up with this idea.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me here today. And this is a book that's been in my brain for years and years. And when I finally met a client of mine who's a horse whispering cowboy, Dustin Davis, who's my co-author, he was working on his ranch, and I went to meet him there and saw how he was working with the horses. And it was really intriguing. And so I started talking to him about it and asking him how he's communicating with them. And we got talking. I said, I actually communicate. I was a conductor when I started. When I went to Johns Hopkins, I went to the Peabody Institute. And so music has been my background, my start. And as a conductor, I worked with musicians, and as a leader in the office, worked with human beings and team members, much like Dustin was working with his horses. And so we decided to sit down and write a book. He wanted to write a book. I wanted to write a book. It was COVID. So, why not spend the time during COVID to do that? And it came up with a book that really is about what we call gray leadership and communicating with people, with horses, in a way that's deeper and more intuitive than we normally do in everyday work, everyday life.
Yeah, deeper and more than. And one of the things that you talk about in your book is gray leadership. It goes throughout the entire book. So what exactly is gray leadership?
So sort of the definition of it is this boundless, non-binary approach to complex issues. Every day we have things coming at us, media, data points. We know what's going on around the world before sometimes they do. I mean, we're watching the Ukrainian war and seeing things happen in real time, perhaps before even the Ukrainians do. We have so much information coming at us, and we need a foundation in which to pile all that information on and make decisions and be flexible about that. We are not in a black and white world anymore where there's a yes and a no. We're really, with all the complexity we have and all the connection to the world through the internet and other ways, we have to be much more flexible and think about decisions as it depends and maybe and how to sort of maneuver through all the complex issues. And that's really what this Gray Leadership Foundation is. And that's what the book is. It gives us different ways of looking at and building that foundation on which to pile everything else.
Well, when you're building that foundation, one of the things that struck me too was just the idea that not everyone's going to have the exact same skill set. People are going to have different talents. But at the same time, I feel like in many ways we've lost the ability to actually respect almost the talents that are inherent to us and see them as gifts and being able to incorporate that into what we do when we're working with other people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, think about, again, going back to your original question about horses and in my case, musicians, you have many horses you have to deal with. Dustin has 100 head of ranch, and I had an 80-member orchestra and 250 members in my team. And we all want this simple solution to working with people. We just want almost like we just take a pill and we all can get along, or if we just follow these 10 steps, we can all get along. And it just doesn't work that way. I mean, as you said, we're very complex, we're individual, and yet at the same time, we have a similar thing, which is we want to belong, right? We all have a sense of wanting to belong. We all have a sense of purpose. And so if we can lock into that simple foundation of belonging, purpose, and then really let the complexity of us as human beings come into the conversation, come into the communication, that's okay. We don't have to have an end-sum game where there's a winner and there's a loser. That goes back to that, sort of boundless, non-binary approach. It's not a winning or losing conversation. It's not a person who is worth your time and a person who's not worth your time. And so I think that, again, having a foundation, and that foundation provides you yourself with a centeredness, with a focus that allows you not to have to win or lose. It's really to engage. And that's really what it's about. That's what, Dustin does with his horses. He engages. The horses don't talk to him. They talk to him in other ways, in other ways of communication. And that's really also what this is about, is communicating with people without having to use words necessarily, but really being more intuitive about how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they may be signaling to you, things that we don't pick up on normally.
So I feel like this is a good time for us to explain a little bit more about horsemanship versus the humanship. Like, break down what that exactly means, because it's on the cover of your book even. So explain that for us.
What it is. I hope
Yeah.
It is. So horsemanship is different than just training horses, right? It's like horsemanship is an art. It's a way of working with horses in this very intuitive way and very gentle way to get them to do what you hope they can do and do their best, right? It's not about the old way of beating a horse or kicking it or dragging it into the barn. It's about having that horse go into the barn because he or she wants to go into the barn, and having them feel like it's their or that horse's power to go back to the barn. Same thing with musicians and people. Gone are the days of the conductor who's a dictator and just yells and screams and says, "This is my way." Same thing with leaders, though, right? I mean, you can't drag people to their destiny. You have to make them feel like they are part of that journey and authentically part of that journey. And so horsemanship is that art of working with horses, and humanship is that art of working with people. And really understanding, as you said earlier, that we're all very complex and nuanced, and to really celebrate that and not fight against it.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me in the book is this idea that, like, to lead the herd, you had to know each of the individual animals. And I guess you could say the same thing in a working environment, that if you're going to lead them, you need all of these different people, but everybody comes with their own perspective on things. They still come with their own ideals on how things are going to be done, a vantage point of any interaction that they're going to have with somebody else in that working environment. That seems to me, though, that could be a problem when you're trying to get everyone to follow into one general idea.
The problem is it takes time. That's really the problem. And that's why a lot of people don't do it, because it takes too much time, so to speak. But I'm a big believer that you have to meet, and this is what we talk about in the book, meet people where they are. Don't expect that they come to you. You need to figure out, just like you said, where they are in their journey, what they need, what they don't need, either in the moment or over a long period of time, and really bring them along as opposed to dragging them. But again, that takes time, but it takes time in the front end. It sort of goes slow to go fast. If you can put the time in and really understand each member of your team, each member of your orchestra, each horse in your herd, then you understand how to adjust in the moment. As a conductor, when the orchestra is playing, you have 80 people who are way smarter than you are, who are extremely talented, and they could do whatever they want. Quite frankly, they could take over the concert if they wanted and do whatever they wanted in the moment. But but you have this communications that are going on all the time. People need you, know when they don't need you, and really feel every single person and where they are in that moment, in that minute. And again, that takes time, but if you do that in the front end, you don't have to do that every day. You'll get into a rhythm and into a groove, so to speak, and be able to work with people and know who needs what when. And everyone is going to be different, and that takes time. And that's what a lot of leaders don't do right now, is take the time to truly and authentically understand their team.
And I think there is a lot of sort of self investment that needs to be made to really examine where you're coming from as a leader, correct? Because one of the things you also talk about in the book is the idea of prejudice, and how if someone is not working to clear that prejudice from however they see the world, how that could get in the way of their leadership, correct?
Right. We are assessing each other all the time, whether we know it or not. We walk into a room of people we never met, and we quickly assess who we trust, who we don't trust, who we like, who we don't like. We don't even know why. It just happens. There's actually a study that was done by a Harvard professor on this, and she was saying that it really had to do with our first times we were on Earth here, and around the cave person time, and do I trust you that you're going to be able to kill this animal correctly and we'll have dinner that night? Or do I even trust you to, if we don't kill the animal, are you going to eat me during the night because we're out on the range here, sleeping out under the stars? So there really is this trust and understanding that we have always had as people, and we still do have as people. So this idea of developing your gray leadership skills, we all have it. It's not something we have to get. It's something we have to develop and really lock into. And again, yes, we have to do that authentically, and we have to do that as leaders, and put that invest that time in the front end to be able to gain it on the back end.
But here's the thing. When you look at leaders, I think people think of leaders as being like up at the top, isolated from everyone else. Maybe some of the people that work for them are afraid to approach them and to talk to them. So is the onus on the people who work for the leader to make contact with them, or is the onus on the leader to find common ground with the people who are working for him or her?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. Again, going back to that prejudice or that understanding of each other, people, we're all human beings again, right? We all have this same purpose of belonging. And so, it doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter what office you sit in, where you are in the food chain, so to speak. So employees shouldn't be overwhelmed by their boss and his or her stature. And at the same time, a boss, a supervisor, a manager should also, again, authentically get to know everyone who's working for them and working with them. It's not even for them, it's working with them. We're all trying to accomplish something, right? And I really believe that organizations, it's not necessarily what they sell that's important or that makes them successful. It's who's there in those seats working to produce the product, to sell the product, to distribute the product. It's the people. And so we need to both come together and work together as a team. And even though there may be what I call a decision matrix of who decides what and where sort of the ultimate responsibility is, we should really think of organizations as flat, where we're all pulling together in the same way, trying to accomplish the same thing.
Which can be hard when you try to get everyone on the same page. I think one of the greatest lessons from going to college isn't necessarily one that's taught in the classroom. It's about learning how to work with people you don't necessarily like or agree with, but you still have to do that. And I think it's an important lesson that we have to learn while we're that age, because you need to do it through the rest of your life. And so it's very important. But how do leaders, how can you get people who are like that to come together for the common goal of whatever the organization is trying to complete?
You know, I think before we even get to college, we're negotiating even on the playground as toddlers. You know, who gets the ball, who gets to do this, who gets to do that. And so, you know, we're negotiating and working with people all the time. And yeah, it's not fun, right? If we took people out of the equation and just had, you know, robots running everything and AI, it would make life a lot less complicated. But we're not there yet. And we have to, like I said earlier, we can go fast if we want to go alone, but together, you know, it's slower, but it's definitely more sustainable. And not only that, but if you look at people as vessels of information, vessels of experiences, it's almost like you can travel the world if you're just in a group, because you have everyone's perspective in that group coming to that table, and you don't have to leave. You can just really revel in their knowledge and in their experiences. And again, if we approach each other and our relationships with not an end-sum game, zero end-sum game, but with this openness and this grayness, you know, which many people think is weak, but I think it's stronger, because you are allowing each other to influence and help each other in a way that is way beyond what you could do by yourself.
Yeah, you can work farther, go farther if you do work together. Just to kind of put you on a spot for a second, because I know you've worked with companies. When you walk into a new work environment, how quickly can you tell if they are a functioning body or a dysfunctional one?
Pretty quickly. And it
Really?
has nothing to do with their finances, or it's about people, right? So you can feel that. You can sense when people are open with each other, open within the structure of the organization, if they're being protective of their information or the way they're communicating. And you can sense the culture by just walking around. It goes back to that intuitive way of approaching life. Just like if you walk into a party, you know if it's going to be a great party or if it's going to be a crappy party, just by the vibe you have at the party. You may not even know why that is, or what you're looking at, or what you're trying to assess, but people, again, create culture. And so even going back to leading, you can't say, this is the culture we're going to have, so go at it, have at it, if the people don't buy into that, because the people create the culture, not the culture creating the people.
Yeah, that's true. And you're right. You can walk into a room right away and to go, these are happy people, or these are not
Exactly.
happy people. You do feel it. You can tell right away. One of the major skills that I think we've kind of lost as a collective society, especially with social media, is listening. People aren't listening to what someone is saying. It's almost like they're ready to return with their volley back with their response, without actually waiting to hear what their other person in the conversation is saying to them. I can't imagine that any place is successful where they're not listening to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. This is a little game that I like to play as well. And two things. One is, if you're really not interested in hearing their answer, if you ask the question and you're not interested in the answer, then don't ask the question. It's like people who pick up their cell phone and say, I can't talk right now, I'm busy. It's like, then don't pick up the phone, right? So that's number one. If you're not interested, don't ask the question. Number two, this is a great way of getting to know someone and bonding very quickly, which is asking them about themselves. Instead of, what do you do? What about if you ask, who are you? What do you believe in? What are your drivers? And you'll be amazed that you can just let them go, and people love to talk about themselves, right? And it gives them a high. Truly, there's a physiological dopamine effect when people talk about themselves. And when they talk about themselves, they feel good about you too, because you're asking them the question. And so everyone wins. I have a friend who, when I visit with that person, they love to talk about themselves, and they have just the best time when we're together. And, I hear about it all the time, like, oh, it was such a great time the other night. But I didn't really say anything. I just asked questions. And so, there's a lot to be learned with people, and also makes them feel good, and it makes the bond between the two of you stronger.
These also sound like dating tips, just FYI. It also sounds like it could be used for that too.
That's another book.
Another book in there, I think. But actually, that listening
Perfect.
does work in relationships too, I would imagine is a good one. Um,
If you
so,
communicate with people, it works.
right. So communicating, and I guess that also means in the organization, people need to feel like they're being heard. That's also part of this too. Like everyone needs to feel like their part in this machine, in this cog, is important. And I think the larger the organization, the harder that might be, right?
Yeah, but you have to, again, it goes back to that slowness and that authenticity. If you're really authentically listening to people, people can feel that. And if you're not authentically listening to people, like when you go buy a car and you're talking to them, but they're not really listening to you, they're just trying to think about, what the interest rate's going to be and how much money they can get out of you. They're not really listening to your needs or desires, or they're doing it in a non-authentic way to get something. But if you're truly listening to people in an authentic way, again, they feel good about that, and again, it makes for a stronger relationship.
Yeah. And during an interview process, it would seem to me that's a great time to ask the person who's inside of the organization more about their journey to get to that point, because they'll feel like they're heard and you seem genuinely interested. I mean, there's many places I can see in work life where this matters.
Yes, and I sometimes call that professional manipulation, but it's also good communication skills. When I actually interview, and I probably shouldn't be saying this because then anytime someone I interview with, they'll think of this, but there are many things you can't ask during an interview nowadays, right? I mean, we're in California and you can barely ask their name anymore. But what I like to do is start an interview off, and truly because I'm interested, is just have them talk to me about their journey, where they've been, where they are, and where they're headed, and why this particular position and how it fits. And they'll talk for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And I get all kinds of information. And again, they feel more relaxed and they feel euphoric because they're talking about themselves. But then I get to hear truly authentically who they are, and not just what they've done. It's how they position what they've done within who they are. That's the most important and the best way to find a team member.
Yeah, you talk a bit about the 3 C's, right?
Yes, which seems to really land with people. The 3 C's that I think are really important in a team member or in a partner or friend. One is, are you curious? Are you interested in other people's perspective? Are you interested in the world around you? Are you interested in trying to figure out that unsolvable thing? Certainly when people say, that you can't solve that, that's impossible. To me, that's when I'm so excited. So curious about people, things, solutions. And then are you creative? Are you creative enough to actually solve for that problem or come up with a different way of looking at it? And you can be curious and you can be creative, and those are fine qualities. But if you're also committed to seeing that through, to engaging, to getting whatever the solution was, execute on that. I think those are the 3 things that really make a fantastic employee and really make a fantastic friend.
Yeah. And just with that in mind, thinking about, leaders that you've seen who you think are doing well, that are successful, what do you note about them?
I know that they are not in the headlines. They are not making news about themselves. They are really listening and elevating those around them and talking more about that. So if you think about some of the leaders in the news nowadays, it's really all about them. And as I said earlier, people, I think that if you're centered and you have this foundation of that's solid, people will feel that. People will know that. You don't need to go tell them that. Really When I talk to mentees, and I wish I would have done this when I was younger, when you work with organizations, you don't have to go in and tell them, that you've got a master's degree and you've got a 4 point, whatever it is nowadays, 5.0 and so forth. And you can do all these great things. They already know that. Come in and talk about what value do they add? What value do you add to the conversation? What value do you add to the relationship? What impact are you going to have for their company? That's what they're more interested in. That's what people are interested in. So I think leaders who are great leaders nowadays really surround themselves with the best teams and work together and sort of take themselves out of the equation.
That's good to know. And I see what you mean about being in the headlines. That really rings true for a lot of things that we've seen over the last few years. I'm looking at the awards that you've gotten for your book. I mean, Nonfiction Book Awards, American Writing Awards, Speak Up Talk Radio and Firebird Book Awards, San Francisco Book Festival Awards. I mean, there's so many, and the 5-star rating from the reader's favorite. Why do you think this is resonating with people so much that you've gotten these accolades for your book? Is it something that's been missing that people haven't been talking about?
What I keep hearing is I think they're complex human communication, intuitive leadership concepts that are talked about and presented in a very simple way in the book. Even our, our good friend Matthew Knowles, who wrote the foreword, said, don't be misled by the sort of simple way that ideas are presented in this book, because they are complex in nature, but they're presented in a way, it's a conversational book. It's conversations on horseman-humanship. I mean, essentially most of the book is Dustin and I talking about these concepts, but in a way where it's like we're just sitting, at the ranch or sitting in the living room talking, and that you're at the table listening. And I think people really there are a lot of leadership books on the market that are fantastic, but this is more conversational, I think more casual, and yet still produces and delivers complex leadership and communication and intuitive leadership information.
Yeah. And I know you are going to be teaching at Johns Hopkins University a course based on your book as part of the Odyssey program. It's titled From the Practice Room to the Boardroom, Developing and Deploying Your Nonlinear Destiny. Tell us a bit more about this course and how does it intertwine with the book's message?
Well, it takes everything we've talked about today, and it really, post-COVID, people have been redefining who they are and finding themselves for the first time, or trying to figure out how to pivot in their career, in their relationships. And this is a way that the course will talk about different, again, foundational issues that you can utilize and then deploy when you are making a pivot on a career, or trying to find who you want to be if you're just out of school and there's so many opportunities now. Again, going back to all the data that's out there and all the information and all the opportunities, if you're not centered, you can get lost in all of that and spend a lot of time wandering. And this course will talk about how to put some foundational pieces in your life to be able to then make those decisions, whether, again, you're starting out or you're pivoting, or you just want to, again, know people and know things more deeply and more intuitively.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, is there anything else that you would just like to mention that I didn't ask you specifically, Paul, that you would just like to note as something important?
I think, again, we need to take time to really be in the moment. And I know that sounds silly and simple. So many times I've walked into organizations and CEOs want me to just fix the finances and make the organization successful. And I start talking about people, and I start talking about all the things we've talked about today. And they said, oh, that's fine. We'll get to that, but just fix the finances. And I think we really have to think about the power of each other and our communication and our connectedness, and how that will actually, and has proven to, increase the finances, increase our happiness, and increase our success.
That's a very positive note to end on. And I have enjoyed thoroughly listening, Paul. to what you were saying here today. So
Okay,
thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us, Paul. Really, really great information. And I really think, I mean, there's something for everyone to get out of it. I really enjoyed reading your book.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.